tackling trade fixtures for the national portion of the real estate exam is essential because this topic catches many students off guard by seemingly contradicting the general rules of real property. In a residential setting, once an item is permanently attached to the property, it becomes real property and stays with the land when it is sold. However, trade fixtures are a major exception to this rule because they are personal property installed by a commercial tenant for the purpose of conducting their specific business. Imagine a tenant who rents a shell of a building to open a professional kitchen. They bolt heavy convection ovens to the floor and install a massive walk-in freezer. Under standard residential fixture rules, you might think those items stay with the building because of the method of attachment. On the exam, you must remember that because these items are essential for the tenant's trade or business, they are classified as trade fixtures. This means they remain the personal property of the tenant even though they are bolted down or integrated into the structure. The exam will often test your ability to distinguish between a standard fixture and a trade fixture based on the context of the lease and the intent of the party who installed it. If the question describes a residential tenant installing a crystal chandelier, that is likely a fixture that becomes part of the real estate. If the question describes a dentist bolting a specialized chair to the floor in a commercial office space, that is a trade fixture. A critical point that frequently appears on the national exam is the timing of removal. A tenant must remove their trade fixtures before the legal expiration of the lease. If they leave the pizza oven or the dental chair behind after they have surrendered the premises, those items undergo a legal transformation. They become the property of the landlord through a legal process known as accession. This is a major trick wording point for exam writers. The exam might ask who owns the equipment if the tenant moves out on Friday but leaves the equipment until Monday without permission. In that scenario, the landlord takes ownership because the tenant failed to remove it within the allotted lease term. Another area where the exam tries to trip you up is the physical condition of the property. While the law grants the tenant the right to take their trade fixtures, they are legally obligated to repair any damage caused by the removal process. If pulling up those bolted-down chairs leaves holes in the concrete floor, or if removing a vent hood leaves a gap in the ceiling, the tenant must fix those issues. You might see a question asking about the tenant's liability during the move-out process, and the correct answer will focus on the tenant's duty to restore the property to its original condition. To keep this straight in your head, remember the mnemonic BAR, which stands for Business Attachment is Removable. If it is attached for a commercial purpose, the law views it as a tool of the trade rather than a permanent improvement to the real estate. This distinction is vital because it protects the tenant's investment in their business equipment and allows them to take the tools of their livelihood with them to a new location. Always look for keywords in the exam prompt like commercial, business, tenant installed, or professional equipment. These are your cues that the standard test for fixtures might be secondary to the trade fixture exception. Remember that trade fixtures are categorized as personal property or chattel, even though they are physically attached to the building. This is a fundamental concept that challenges the general definition of a fixture. In most cases, attachment equals real property, but for trade fixtures, attachment does not change the ownership status from the tenant to the landlord. The exam will test this by asking you to categorize a specific item. If you see a dry cleaner's garment rack or a grocery store's refrigerated display case, identify it immediately as a trade fixture and classify it as personal property. Mastering this distinction ensures you won't fall for the common trap of assuming all bolted-down items belong to the property owner. Stay focused on the intent and the commercial nature of the agreement to get these questions right every time. The key is to remember that trade fixtures are the exception to the rule, and the law favors the tenant's right to continue their business elsewhere. This logic applies across all 50 states on the national portion of your exam, because it stems from common law principles regarding trade and commerce. When you see an item that is clearly for business use, do not let the bolts and screws convince you it is real property.